Hey, I'm Pat, and in this video I will be going over creating and scripting animations in Roblox Studio. So the first thing we're going to want to go over is at the top of your screen in Studio there's a bunch of different tabs. We're going to need to use the Avatar tab here. I'm going to be using the default animation editor or whatever. You could use Lunar or whatever, but it's not necessary for this. A lot of people like to use Lunar. I've never really used it, so I don't know. It has some important, useful things, but we're going to use the rig builder, which will allow us to pretty much create a dummy rig, which is basically just a clone of a default character, so that way we can use it as like an animate, so we can animate it, or we could use it as like an NPC or something, but we're going to be using it to animate, obviously. So then you're going to go ahead and open the animation editor under the Avatar tab here, right? And once you do that, you'll see it opens up, and you have to click a rig in order to begin animating. Once you do that, it'll ask you to name your animation. I never really do this. I only name it when I export it, but it doesn't matter. It's up to you. So once we do that, you can see now we have a bunch of things here. We got some play buttons here, as you can clearly see. We got like this little loop here, the duration, and this is kind of the timeline of our script. We got like this little like line that we can drag around to manipulate where we are in our timeline, and you can see over here it updates over here with where we are. So we're gonna go ahead and start off pretty quick. I'm not gonna make a complex animation or anything serious, but basically what happens is you can pretty much move the body parts around just as you would with like your rotate or your move tool, and pretty much it will automatically create like these diamonds here. And what these diamonds are called are keyframes, and these are basically like slides in like your animation, kind of like if you think about like how a video is kind of like just a bunch of pictures playing at once really fast. It's kind of like the same for an animation, where the keyframe is kind of like the picture, and Roblox will automatically create like you can see they'll automatically create like individual keyframes leading up to the keyframe you created. So because we started here, Roblox will keep our default, which was this is what we started at, and they will automatically create like individual keyframes to slowly transition our arm up to match the keyframes that we have here. So if we click this play button, you'll see it kind of like quickly moves up, and if we want it to take longer, we could move it down the timeline a little bit more, and now you can see it moves up a little bit slower. And now say after we move up, we want it to go out a bit, like kind of like a punch, right? We can do that. You can see it goes up and then it goes straight out. Kind of a shitty punch, but I swear I'm a professional animator. And what we can do is we can copy this beginning and we can paste it somewhere back over here, and that will allow us to kind of go back to the way it was. And if we want, we can take these keyframes and we can copy them again, which is our kind of like the end of our punch. We can paste that maybe like here, and that way right in here it won't move at all, so it's kind of like a pause in our animation. So you can see it kind of pauses now before it goes back to being at our side. Alright, pretty professional punch. I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to go over a few other things though. There's this little button here. This is allows you to toggle whether or not the animation is looped. So if we go ahead and toggle that, you'll see it keeps playing over and over again. It doesn't stop, which will be the same way it'll be in game. So if you had something like a walking or running animation where you need it to play repeatedly and you don't want to keep making it play, you could just make it looped and stop it whenever you want to stop it, pretty much. But if you don't want it looped and just want it to play one time, just don't loop it, and that's what we'll do, right? So the next thing would be these 3 dots over here, which gives you a bunch more things to do. So we can save it, we can import an animation if we want to, we can publish it, we can create another one, we can set the animation priority, which is a pretty important thing actually. So the animation priority pretty much determines the level the animation is at. So say if it's like an idle animation, it can be overridden by a movement or an action animation, because obviously when you're moving the arms and stuff, there's other animations that'll move the arms as well. So you have to determine whether or not it'll override those other animations or not. So if it's like a movement animation when you're walking, you know, your arms like move around, right? And if you make it an idle, then it won't override the arms moving during your walking. So what you're going to want to do obviously is make an action animation, so that way it has higher priority over like movement or idle, so those don't interfere with your animation, right? So I'll do that, and then all you have to do is just publish it to Roblox. So once we do that, it will give us the option to change its name and set a description, as well as the creator, which is a very important thing. You can't play other people's animations, so if you're in like a group or something, you need to publish the animation to the group instead of yourself, so that way you can use it inside the group game. So for the title, I'm just going to call it Punch, and then we're just going to submit it, and you'll see it uploads, and then it gives you a link. This link's kind of important because we need these numbers here. This is our animation ID right here, these numbers. So I'm going to click on the link, and then I'm just going to double tap where the numbers are to quickly highlight them and copy them, so that way I have the numbers copied so I can use them later on. So that's pretty much it for creating your animation. Now all we had to do is pretty much create an animation instance and script it, right? So we're gonna put a local script instead of starter player scripts, because all animations should be handled on the client. This is because player's character is actually owned by the client, so any changes the client makes to the character will pretty much replicate to all the other players. So everybody else will see you moving your arms or whatever if you move your arms inside the local script, right? So that means that we don't need to play or handle animations on the server really. We can just handle them on the client, which can be a lot better for performance. It cuts down on stress for the server and things like that, so it's a lot better to use them in local scripts. So inside of here, all we gotta do now is add an animation instance. We can put it inside of replicated storage or wherever. I'm just gonna put it inside of our script because that's kind of convenient for how we're using it right now, right? And you can see it doesn't have many properties. All it really has is just the animation ID. So that's where we're gonna paste our numbers. And if we hit enter, it'll automatically add like the RBX asset ID part, which makes it a little bit easier for us. So that's pretty much it for the animation instance. So now we have to figure out how to script this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it so when we press Q it plays the animation. So we're going to use your input service for that. So I'm going to go ahead and get user input service with get service. And then we will also need our animation. So we're going to make a reference for that. I don't really need wait for child. So we'll make a variable for our animation. Now, I'm gonna also need players. What the hell did I just do? Alright. Not going well for me right now. It's okay. So now we're gonna need the local player, because we're gonna need a way of accessing our character, which can be accessed through the local player. So we're gonna get our player with local player, and then we're gonna need to get our character. And a good way of getting the character in a script like this, where the script immediately runs when the game starts, and there's a good chance our character will not be loaded when it does that. Another thing as well is whenever your player dies, your character gets destroyed. So you're gonna need to update your character variable, or know that the character is being recreated when that happens. So actually it's probably not a good idea for me to define the character right there now that I'm thinking about it, because if the character dies after they join the game, then the script will pretty much break, because the character variable won't be anything anymore, because the initial character was destroyed. right? Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm gonna listen on input began, and we're gonna go ahead and get the key that they pressed and game processed event. If it's a game processed event, then we'll just return end, which pretty much ends the function right there, so it doesn't continue anymore. And then we also want to check if the key is the Q. So, and we're going to do not. So if the key is not Q, then we're just going to return end as well. So key, not key code. Now you could just do this like with a big if statement with like if GP and key code, or if not GP and key code. But doing it this way, we avoid making an extra indentation, and it looks a lot cleaner with just like the single line here, and then we can put all of our script after it without having a bunch of extra indents, right? So now what we can do is we can define our character, and we're going to do that by doing player.character, but there's a good chance that the character may not be loaded if the player presses Q. However, you know, if the player is pressing Q, the character probably is loaded, but they may have like just died, or they're in the middle of respawning, or they're just joining the game or something, and there's a good chance that this could throw an error, and you don't really want that. So what we're going to do is player character added and wait. So character added is just an event of player, and it will return the character, right? So we also can use wait on any events, right? So what this will do is it'll wait for the character added event to trigger, and once it triggers, it'll return the character, which will be stored in our character variable. So if the player.character is nil, then it'll check our OR, and it'll be like, hey, this is nil, so we gotta try and find something that isn't nil. So we'll go ahead and check the second statement we got here, which tells it to wait for the character added event, and then once the character added event triggers, it'll return our character, and that'll be stored in our variable. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And then we'll also need our humanoid. So in order for us to get that, all we gotta do is just do wait for child on character for our humanoid, because when the character is added, there's a chance that the humanoid wasn't immediately added, so we just gotta use wait for child to wait for the humanoid to be added. And now the original way for loading animations was to use it on the humanoid, but that is now actually deprecated, which pretty much means that it's an old way of doing it, and there's a newer updated way to do it. The older way won't be updated by Roblox, and it'll probably end up being glitchy and buggy in the future, so it's highly recommended to use the newer version. And the way we use the newer version is we gotta get the animator, which is actually just a child of the humanoid. So all we gotta do is wait for child on the humanoid to get the animator, right? And that's pretty simple like that. So now that we got the animator, we can load the animation. So what we do when we load the animation is it pretty much takes the animation instance and it loads it onto the humanoid that we give it, or the animator, I guess, right? And in that case, it will return a animation track, which is pretty much just like an object. Similar to how when we have tween service and we use the create method, it creates like a tween that has like events and properties and methods that we can call. Animation track is kind of similar in that way. So we get our animator and we just do load animation, and we just pass it our animation instance, which we defined up here, right? Which is just this animation with our animation ID in it. And now what we can do is we can take our track and we can use the play method to pretty much play the animation. I know that was kind of a lot for just playing an animation, but it's not that complicated. It's I mean, you could do it a lot quicker and a little bit more messier, but it's gonna be a little bit more animation prone. So now if I press Q, you'll see it throws the punch. Why is it repeating? What did I do? Oh, I think I need to debounce. That's probably what's going on. My arm's just kind of doing its own thing right now. I could add a debounce in here real quick. Oh wait, if GPE, oh, this should be an or right here instead of an and this will also do an or, not debounce, or debounce, not debug. We want debounce. If I can spell debounce right, what the hell am I doing? Then we'll just set debounce to true after we play the animation, or before. It's a little bit better that way. And we can do debounce equals false. But now, say we want to wait for the animation to finish playing before we set our debounce back to false. Instead of using a task.wait to kind of guess the duration, what we can do is we can do task.wait track, and then we can do length to get the length of the track, which is just a property of the animation track. So we can get that, and it'll give us the length in seconds of the animation. But Roblox actually recently just added a new event. I think it's track.completed. I hope this is right. It very well might not be. I didn't do research before this video. I think it's track.completed. So it's similar to like tween.completed or whatever it's called. And it's just an event that triggers after the track is finished playing. So we'll see if that works. There's a likely chance that I guessed wrong, but I might have guessed right. Nope, that's an error. Oh, it's ended, I think. I think it's ended. Let's try it. See what happens. Alright, so it's working right. You can hear, hopefully you can hear that I'm spam pressing Q right now. You can see it's only playing it after the animation is finished because we're waiting on the track ended event. Now, one thing to take note is that each time that we each time that we press Q, we're actually loading the animation track again and creating a new animation track, right? Which is kind of inefficient. We could just create an animation track one time and then reuse that each time, which will be a little bit more efficient because we actually are limited to 256 animation tracks per character. So if we just keep fucking English, if we just keep spam pressing Q, say we press it like 257 times, we'll start getting like warnings in the output, I'm pretty sure, saying like that we've reached the limit or whatever. So what instead we'll do is we'll define track at the top here, and we won't assign it a value once we create it, but what this will let us do is let us use the track pretty much anywhere, and it'll define it outside of our function here, which will keep it from being limited within inside here, and it'll make it so our value can always be accessed whenever it's called. Instead of doing local here, we can just do track equals. And now what we can do is we can do if not track, then we'll go ahead and create our animation track inside of this if statement. And after it's done, we can play the track because now we know that track is 100% not nil because we either just created it or we checked that it wasn't nil inside of our if statement. So this will allow us to only have one animation track at a time because we're checking to make sure it's not nil. And if it is nil, then we go ahead and load our animation, which should make sense, right? So now what we'll do is we go ahead and press play, and it should work just the same. You can see, press Q and it throws a punch, right? There's there's a ton of things behind animations. There's a lot of different properties for animation track, like speed, looped, is playing, animation length, time position, keyframe reached. There's so many things. I'm not going to go over everything in this video though. I'm going to leave a link in the description for at least a few links for you to look at to read up on like animations and things. I know like If you're watching this video, you're probably not a big fan of reading, but it's really a good way of learning and understanding things is learning to just read things, because not every thing has a video for it. So it's really good to be able to read things on the dev forum or on the Roblox API. So I'm going to leave some links for you to look into other things about animation in case you need it, but this is just like to teach you the basics. Now I'm going to show you the script I want you to make pretty much. So we already have a punching animation, so I want you to make pretty much a punching tool. So this is a tool, right? And what happens is when we left click with it, it'll throw a punch. You can give it a handle if you want and make its transparency 1, or you can turn off requires handle, so that way you don't have to use a handle, but it might be easier to use a handle if you want, but I didn't use a handle, so it's up to you how you want to make it. But yeah, so I recommend you try and make it on your own. It's not too hard, it's really just a tool, and you left click, and if the punch hits like another player, then it'll deal damage. And I pretty much went over how to do this in like kind of like other videos, just, you know, it doesn't have a animation, right? So I taught you kind of how to detect hit collision, but not how to like do it with an animation. And really the idea is you just do all the hit detection on the server and everything, and then you just tell the client to play the animation for kind of like a visual, because you shouldn't be relying on the client for like damage and things like that, right? So go ahead and try and make that, and I'm gonna go over how I made it right now. So I'm gonna show you, or I actually forgot to actually show you how it works, but it's okay, I'll do that right now. So I throw the punch, and you see it does damage to him, and it kind of has a cooldown, so I can't like spam it. You could adjust the cooldown if you want, or you know, whatever, but I have a cooldown, so you can't just like spam punch, right? It's kind of like a combat system where like things have cooldowns or whatever, right? Whatever, I don't know, I'm not a combat system professional or whatever, but I'll show you how I made and the script now. So what I have is only 4 instances here, so it's not too complicated, right? It's just 4 instances. So I got a server script for handling the server, a client script for handling this client, right? And then we got a remote event to pretty much tell the client to play the animation, and then we just have our animation here, which has the animation ID. So the first thing I'll go over is the server, but I can't spell functions. There we go. So I got all my variables up here. We need the player service. The tool is just obviously the tool, which is the script's parent, because the parent's under the tool. Animation remote is just our remote event. And then we got 2 boolean variables, is punching to tell us whether or not the player is currently punching, and then we got a debounce to handle the cooldown pretty much. And then we got a connection, which we don't actually give it a value initially because we need to use it later on. And pretty much the idea is we define it here, so that way we can access it within our unequipped and equipped function. And then we have a function here, which is just our punch hit function. Really, you could have just defined this inside this equipped right here, but that's kind of ugly. It adds like an extra indentation, which isn't really needed. So what I did is I defined it here to kind of make it look a little bit more cleaner and easier to read. And what we do is this just fires whenever the player's right hand is touched right here, because we connected it to the touched event. And then we stored that connection inside of our connection variable, so that way once we unequip the tool, we can disconnect it. You could just have the connection always listening, so you could just connect it up here, but that's kind of a waste, and it's a little bit harder to get the character that way. So I did it this way because it's a little bit better and fancier, I guess. So right here we have the humanoid, and something to keep in mind when you're getting a humanoid is there's a chance that I'll hit an accessory, and the part for an accessory is not under the character, it's actually under the accessory. So in order to get the character, if you hit an accessory, you have to do parent 2 times, because the first one would be the accessory, and then the next one would be the character, because the accessory is underneath the character, right? That should make sense. Then all we do is we check to see if we found a humanoid, and if we didn't, then we return, or if we are not punching, then we also return. And if you know, return just ends the function at that line, right? So then that will keep it from going on. But if it does keep going, we'll set is punching back to false to prevent us from doing damage again, right? And then we'll take damage. We'll deal damage to our humanoid. Right. So we already get the equipped. The equipped just pretty much connects our touched event to this function up here, which we'll call that. And then our unequipped event just disconnects the connection. So if we didn't disconnect it, it would keep making more and more connections, which would actually cause quite a few bugs. Or actually, I don't know if it would cause bugs in this case, but it would cause a memory leak, which would be very, very bad for performance. But the next thing is our tool activated function, which isn't too complicated either, right? We just check if is punching or debounce, and if either of those is true, then we just return, because if they're currently punching, we don't want to punch again, and if the debounce is still on cooldown, then we don't want to punch again, right? So we just return and end the function right there. And then we set is punching and debounce to true, which prevents us from punching again. And then is punching allows us to deal damage up here in our touched function, right? Because it needs to be true in order for us to deal damage. And then we tell the client to play our animation. So we just fire our remote to the client, and we get the player by using the get player from character method, which is from the players service, which is why we got players up here. And the character is obviously just the parent of the tool. And then we have a task.wait for a cooldown. It's just 1 second. And then we set debounce and is punching back to false to prevent us from dealing damage, and it will let us punch again as well, right? So the cooldown and the damage, everything is all handled on the server, and just the animation is on the client, right? So we'll go over the client script now. So we only got a few variables here, 3 variables. The punch track is to store our animation track once we load it, so that way we don't have like multiple animation tracks playing. And then we got the tool, and we got the animation we want to play. So I used wait for child here because the script wasn't finding the remote event once we loaded in, as soon as we loaded in at least. So I used wait for child to make sure that we wait for the remote event to load in. And then on the client event, because we're firing to the client from the server, right? Fire client. So on client event, we will then trigger this function. And what we do is we check if there is not a punch track already. Why did I do tack? I can't spell. So if there's not a punch track, then we'll get our character, and then we'll get the humanoid, and we'll get the animator from the humanoid. And we'll use the animator to load our animation onto the character, and then we'll store that animation track inside of our punch track variable, so that we can use it later on in the script, and we don't have to make multiple of them, right? And this if statement will prevent us from, you know, creating multiple. Then we got the punch track, and all this does is it just plays the animation, right? That's what play does. We learned that already, right? So it's not too complicated. Obviously, there's multiple ways you could have done this. You could have had like a little square as the handle for the tool and used that to detect touching. You could have had, you know, a touched event up here that's always running and checking to see if the player is hitting something. But there's a lot of ways you could have done it. It gets a little tricky with detecting when the player is punching and when they aren't punching and that kind of stuff. So I know that can be a little tricky, but for the most part, the animation part was pretty straightforward and things like that. So this is kind of like a basic way to make a little punch, right? If you want to make an advanced combat system or something a little bit more complex, it gets kind of challenging because there's a lot of different things that play into a combat system. And usually for something like that, you'd want to use module scripts or object-oriented programming, but obviously you probably don't know any of that yet. But I will have future videos on those, so stay tuned for my advanced series when I go over those, which are really useful things to know for managing your code. But that's it for this video. Hopefully it was helpful in teaching you animations. I'll leave some links in the description for other information that you might need, and thanks for watching.